learn more about tattoos, but to think about what style that you like that I'm showing you. So when we are ready to start designing our own tattoos, not only do you have to think about um, not only what images you want, maybe what colors you want in it, but also kind of what you want it to look like. So just knowing what some of the major styles are in tattoos will give you some sort of direction and help you decide on your tattoo. Now, so this isn't an exhaustive list of tattoos. These are just, again, I don't know everything, but these are just some of the major sort of styles, and styles kind of come in and out. I'm also sneaking some history of tattoos in here as well. There's just so much to talk about in terms of tattoos and everything that you need to know, and just even learning how to draw them. So just bear with me. Um, one form of style of tattoos is a photorealist or a realism tattoo, and that's when you're looking to have, something very realistic put on your body. So, for example, if it's a portrait of someone, you want it exactly on your body. So again, when we're looking at these styles of tattoos, when you think about tattoo artists have their own sort of style that they're really good at, just like artists have their own style that they're really good at and the style of art that they do. So tattoo artists are very similar that way. So for example, if you wanted a realistic looking tattoo, you want to make sure that you go to an artist that specializes in that, and you're going to look in their portfolio and make sure that they're able to do that. So you don't end up with something like this, especially if you're going for sort of the realistic look of tattoos, right? It's really, really, really important. So that's why you check out their portfolios, and that's why you do your research. Another new genre that's sort of come out with tattoos is the watercolor tattoo. So they still use inks and everything the same way that they would for any other tattoos, but they have this really neat sort of watercolor effect in their tattoos. So very beautiful. And again, this is something that people have to specialize in. It's a skill that they have to learn because it's very different than regular tattoos, but they're very beautiful, and there's some beautiful work that you can do with watercolor tattoos. So this might be something that you like, the very soft colors. Tribal tattoos was a huge fad probably in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was the black, especially for men, right, these black sort of abstract designs on your body. Now, I think they look really cool. A lot of men back in the day went out and got these sorts of tattoos like this here. But the problem is that after a while, and this is when there is fads, and that's why you have to be careful not to follow fads and trends necessarily when you get tattoos, because as you can imagine, these are, really huge, and they cover huge parts of your body. And so a lot of men they're sort of regretting that decision. But as you can imagine, one, they'd be very difficult to cover up just all of the black areas, and quite often they did, huge areas. So to cover it up would be very, very difficult, and even more difficult would be to remove them. We talked about the removal process. Just to give you some context of where the tribal look of tattoos came from is throughout history, so this is a very, very brief history lesson. Throughout history, these sort of black, solid patterns on people's bodies comes from a number of cultures, and it was almost some cultures it was just for men, and some cultures it was for men and women, but almost like a rite of passage. Either when you became like a man, when you became a woman at a certain age, it was a form of like becoming a warrior or a different role in society. So one of the most popular ones are the Maori tattoos. I think are from New Zealand, and they have traditionally they do these images, these designs and stuff on their face, both men and women, and they're solid black, and there's these geometric patterns, and some are all over the body. So that's kind of where these sort of tribal tattoos influences come from. Now, the reason why they're solid black and just thick outlines is originally many of these cultures before tattoo machines and modern day inks, how they would tattoo them is this method where they would have like a hot steel rod, and they would kind of chisel and poke them into your body. Now the ink, what they would use is they would actually take like things like charcoal and soot and actually rub it in the open wounds, and then it would heal and it would keep that the blackness look of the tattoo. So you can just imagine how painful that would be, especially on your face. And you know, if one of the cultures, if some of it was a rite of passage for you to become a warrior, it was, you know, a sign that you were tough enough to be able to withstand that, especially on your face. And of course, if you weren't able to withstand the pain if getting it all finished, then you would have this incomplete tattoo on your face, and everyone would know that you were a coward. There's something that's new that's been coming around the past little while, and it stems from that old ancient way of doing tattoos, and it's actually called stick and poke tattoos. We talked about how one of the methods of creating value for tattoos is stippling, which is just using the dots, because that's kind of how it works with the needles going in and out. This one actually, the stick and poke method of making tattoos, really capitalizes on just using the dots, because they are using a stick and actually just poking the ink in with your skin. So this is a more traditional way of doing tattoos, and it's really come into popularity over the past while. So you can see how beautiful they all are. And again, they do this. They can do shading, they can do lines, but all with that stick and poke method. So that's becoming very popular. I haven't seen a lot with color. Traditionally, they seem to be more sort of, you know, black ink and with slight little bits of color here and there, but they seem to be just mostly black. But that's another sort of look that's very soft and elegant, I think. There's also piggybacking on that. There's these tattoos that are just black work, where they're just focused on black lines, different thicknesses of lines, different not necessarily shading, maybe a tiny bit of shading. You can see they have kind of this pressure shading look, and then they have like that stippling kind of stick and poke sort of look, but very black lines, a solid black area. So a whole variation of sort of different values, just using all different types of blacks and made up with different lines, but very elegant, very beautiful. Celtic tattoos are come from sort of, if that's something in your background, if you have like something Celtic in your family, but the idea of these knot designs and these intricate sort of symbols on your body. So a lot of tattoos are about your heritage as well. We probably talking to some of the people you interviewed for your tattoo interview homework about some of the reasons why people get tattoos and why they choose things. And a lot of people do it for their ancestors, or talking about their culture. And so Celtic tattoos kind of fall into that. Japanese tattoos, the Japanese tattoos are very elegant and very soft in the way that they're shaded. And that stems from like the traditional Japanese sort of watercolor art that they very well known for. So they do have this very watercolory, beautiful, elegant sort of style. And a lot of the imagery would be very Japanese, with the koi fish and the dragons. And also there's a tradition of these full body tattoos that again also relate to sort of a warrior rite of passage sort of reason why they get tattoos as well. So that's so Japanese, like, again, these are my personal preferences. I think they're beautiful. I really like them. I like the soft colors and the mixtures of all the different shadows and all the different colors. Gothic tattoos used to be really popular, maybe not so much anymore. It used to be sort of a fad. But maybe I guess they still are, that sort of like gory, kind of like scary monster look of tattoos that tend to be more dark in color, more maybe just the blacks and the grays, maybe some reds in them, but more, sort of dark imagery. So I don't know if that's still popular, but I know it was really popular when I grew up. There's also a gang and prison tattoos. Not that, you're going to say, I'm going to go out and I like the look of the gang and prison tattoos, but it's really important to be able to identify sort of what is a gang and prison tattoo. I mean, they're done not necessarily for artistic reasons. They're done to sort of identify that they're part of, a gang, or that they've been in prison. So these aren't necessarily done in professional tattoo shops. These are the ones that are probably done with homemade tattoo machines that are made in prison, perhaps, or perhaps just, like a local guy, or I guess, or girl, working, out of like a house or a garage or something like that. So the goal of these are not necessarily artistic expression, but sort of like a marking to know that you're part of a group or part of a gang. And quite often they'll have, numbers, they'll have symbols. I'm not an expert in all the different sort of gang tattoos or prison tattoos. There's a whole bunch of information and research that has been done into that. They can be on the face, they can be on the body, and then in the tattoo, because it's something that's permanent for the rest of your life. Once you're part of a gang and you have this tattoo, it's really, especially if it's on your face or on your neck, on your arm where it's visible, I mean, you're marked for life. So it's hard to leave the gang, and if you do, you're marked for life. How to have a job afterwards, it makes it really complicated. But what's interesting about military tattoos is the effect is sort of the same in terms of your membership of something. If you're a member, a part of, perhaps the Navy or something, maybe you want to have a tattoo to say that you're part of this group, which is, the idea behind that is very similar to getting a tattoo if you're part of a gang, right? But what's different is military tattoos would be done in a professional shop are very much more artistic and more elaborate, right? As opposed to just, the simple outlines and just the numbers. They may have, numbers identify them to be part of a squad or something like that. So that part might be very similar, but you can definitely identify it by it being way more artistic and having, this one obviously way more elaborate and shading and everything in it as well, right? You're pledging allegiance to maybe the country that you were fighting for, maybe the group that you were in, which again isn't much different than sort of a gang or prison tattoo, but they're just done very differently. What else we got here? Oh, traditional tattoos or old school tattoos. So these are the ones I think of when, like, I don't know, when my grandpa would have got a tattoo, right? The old school sort of Ed Hardy. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He's like an old school traditional tattoo artist. So they have bold outlines. So these are the tattoos that we sort of think of with the black outlines, and then the very, very basic colors inside of them. So basic colors, I mean like the basic colors you would find on the color wheel, like, the primary and the secondary colors. They're red, yellow, blue, orange, and green and purple. They do have some sort of shading in them. The images are very like traditional, like you get the hearts, you get the swords, you get the dice, you get anchors, you get women. So they're like old school sort of tattoos that kind of came out of, I guess, the Victorian era. So they kind of stem from when the first popular tattoos kind of came out for people that sort of decorating their bodies with tattoos. So they're very recognizable, and there's a lot of traditional sort of images that go along with it, like the snakes coming out of the eyeballs of skulls and things like that. A new fad that has sort of come up recently is a neo-traditional. So it's a new version, it's a new take on the traditional tattoos, the old school tattoos. So they're called neo-trad tattoos or neo-traditional tattoos. And what they're taking from that is the old school sort of black outline and some of the imagery of the hearts and the daggers of the skulls. And sometimes they're expanding the imagery a bit more, but just the way that they're coloring them has changed. Now, what's evolved from the early traditional old school sort of looking tattoos is that we have better inks now. We have wider variety of colors, not just the primary and the secondary colors. So you can tell the difference between the traditional tattoos and the neo-traditional tattoos, that they're not just the basic colors, but there's more range of colors. I also like tattoo artists have gotten a lot better. The skills have evolved. The equipment is better. So things like when we look at like the old school tattoos, is sometimes the shading isn't necessarily perfect. So the shading's improved in the new traditional tattoo styles, but also like things like the perspective is much better and just more skilled, right, and more elaborate, right, because we're learning more as artists, and again, we have better access to better equipment, more colors. But it's very much the same sort of the bright colors. Sometimes the same imagery of the skulls and things like that. They've evolved a little bit more. So the black outlines and sort of the bright sort of colors. Abstract tattoos is another way where you're not really committing to an exact image, but you like the design. So that's another style of tattoos. The fine ink, black and gray, they're kind of like they're realistic, but they're a little bit different. It's just they're not incorporating any color. The shading is just very soft and very elegant, and as you can imagine, this takes quite a bit of skill where they're just using all different ranges of values of grays, and sometimes they put the white on top of it just to highlight it. So very beautiful. It's quite often it looks like it's actually lifting off of the skin, but unlike, which is different than the photorealism ones where they could potentially use color. This one's very much just all about the ranges of the blacks and the grays and very soft. Maybe not so much anymore, but for a while sort of graffiti tattoos were a bit of a fad. I don't like them, but they were kind of neat. We didn't go into too much detail about the history of tattoos, but there are some negative associations of tattoos. So just to make clear that the following ones are not major styles of tattoos, but just to sort of explain why some people do see tattoos as something negative on your body, and why there are some people that sort of judge you about if you have tattoos, but where that comes from. And a lot of it was, when we talked about the old school tattoos of the anchors and of, the women and the skulls and things like that, they do have associations with the hoity-toity, stuffy, kind of Victorian area people when tattoos started becoming popular in the early 1900s, when the culture was very conservative, people very covered up their bodies. Tattoos, when they started becoming a little bit popular to decorate your body, they were meant, it was sailors that did it. It was working class people. It was prostitutes. So that stuffy sort of judgmental negative connotation was sort of a judgment against, the working class people. One thing that I always never really fully understood until recently is when I got my first tattoo when I was younger, my grandfather was very upset with me about getting a tattoo. And just sort of put it into perspective is my grandparents, but probably maybe your great-grandparents may have fought in the war. And tattoos were given to Jewish people in the concentration camps in Auschwitz. And what's really horrible is, so originally what had happened is serial numbers were put on the clothing of Jewish people in the camps to identify them. And then eventually what had happened is, as you know, when they went to the gas chambers, their clothing was removed. When people died or were killed, the Jewish people were killed, their clothing was removed. So there was no way to identify the bodies because they no longer had the clothing on them. So what they started to do was starting to tattoo serial numbers right on the bodies of people in the concentration camps so their bodies could be identified. So some of the survivors of Auschwitz, of course, their whole life have this tattoo of the serial number. So as you can just imagine, that relationship between, having a tattoo with such a horrible, horrendous connotation relationship with tattoos. So you can understand, why people like in my grandfather's generation really didn't see tattoos as a positive thing. And just, my God, they even, tattooed children to identify them. So just to put that into perspective, why some people, maybe some older people, don't look at it as something that's self-expression, right? Something to decorate your body. Very different relationship with tattoos. Tattoos also do have relationships we've seen with gangs, but also criminals. I know there's so much to research and understand about the particular imagery and the meaning behind tattoos and what they symbolize with crime. I know in the earliest times throughout history, and tattoos have been around for a long time, but even some places, even in Victorian culture, criminals were tattooed with certain symbols to sort of identify them. Sometimes some cultures actually tattooed the crime that they actually did either on their face or on their body somewhere. So even if they served their time in whatever fashion that they had in that particular culture, for the rest of their lives, they would know that they were guilty of some sort of the crime. I know there's so much research in Russian prison, the tattoos that are done there, and some of them are very symbolic about not necessarily their crimes, but they're done to themselves, and they're, for example, for a thief, maybe they have a certain tattoo that represents luck for them, to help them sort of steal more. There's so much different stuff, and of course, with a lot of them, there's relationship to the KKK and neo-Nazis, and there's so much stuff, and there's all these different codes and different meanings that I really have no idea what they mean, whether they're on their face, whether they're on their body. I've heard things, whether you have a teardrop tattooed on your face, it means you killed one person. I don't know all of that. There's so much to know. But again, this is why a lot of people in society view tattoos and associate it with gangs or criminal activity, or perhaps they have, your the associations with Auschwitz and things like that. So that's just put in perspective why we have this thing where people might judge you for having tattoos, and you may not understand, why, what's the big deal. It's just body art. But the history of tattoos is very complicated. But this is why some people might be very judgmental for that. Now, really quickly, I just want to compare and contrast, just again, to go over the different tattoo styles, just so, again, you can understand the subtle differences and where they come from. The image, because you're super smart, I want to just go over, I want to compare and contrast just a couple of the tattoo styles, just so you can pick out the differences and show me how smart you are. Plus, I got a new stylus. So let's look at these two images. So which one is which, and what are the similarities, and what are some of the differences? So we look at the one on the left, and it is a traditional tattoo, right? The one image on the right is a neo-traditional or a neo-trad tattoo. So what is the difference and what are the similarities? So obviously what is the same? It's that bold black outline for both of them. So when the tattoo is getting done, there's a black bold outline. What about the shading? There's shading in both of them. What about the colors? The use of bright colors. Now let's look at what is and imagery. The imagery is the same with the traditional use of hearts, of daggers, of dice, of skulls, of women. I sort of think of the heart tattoo with mom on it, right? Those are sort of the traditional imagery. So that's what's similar. Now, what is different primarily is the evolution of the traditional tattoos to the neo-traditional ones, because tattoo artists have improved in their skill. So things like perspective, like where the dice is, the ability to do better shading, and then just sort of stronger sort of images and more just better done. But what also has improved is the different types of inks that we have and more variety of colors. So with traditional tattoos, yes, they are bright colors, but they are traditionally just the primary and the secondary colors. So the red, yellow, blue, orange, purple, and green colors. So what we would say is just like colors that came right out of, the basic colors. But the neo-traditional colors, because more inks are available now, we have a wider range of colors, and hence because we have a wider range of colors, then the effects of shading and everything like that can be improved. Okay, so that's what's the similarities and the differences between a traditional tattoo and the neo-traditional, the new version of the traditional tattoos. Now let's look at these two different tattoos. So the image on the left would be like, well, this one is a gang tattoo, and the image on the right is a military tattoo. So I got a new stylus, but it's hard to write. It's smooth, but it's hard to write on my screen. Still fun. Okay, so the gang tattoo and the military tattoo. So let's look at what's similar. Well, one, they both have the same purpose, right? They're both saying that they belong to some sort of group. So obviously the gang tattoos are talking about that they belong to some sort of gang. The military tattoos, that they're belonging obviously to the military. So it's the same sort of idea behind it. The gang tattoos, however, are probably done either in prison or maybe well, anywhere but a professional tattoo shop. I don't think a lot of tattoo shops would actually do gang tattoos. I don't think they want to go down that road. Whereas military tattoos are probably done by a professional, and they're done in tattoo shops. Gang tattoos are very basic, so just usually one color, usually just black, because of the materials that they're using. They're not done by professional tattoo artists, so they usually just have very basic symbols or numbers or letters, and all of those things stand for certain things, and I don't know everything. MS-13 is one of the most popular sort of gangs, I think, in the States. That's coming out of Mexico, as far as I know. Whereas military tattoos are way more artistic. So there's imagery involved. Sometimes there's words, sometimes there's not. Sometimes they'll actually have numbers and stuff associating them with maybe a squad that they were in. Usually colors and shading. So the goal of the military tattoo is for it to look very artistic. The gang tattoo is mostly just for a symbol. So those are some of the similarities and the differences between gang tattoos and military tattoos. So, okay, so thank you for looking at some of the styles. I hope that some sort of stood out for you in your mind to think about, okay, I think I would like, this is what I've sort of drawn to. Not just the imagery, but actually the way that the tattoo looks. So let's do our next lesson, and we are actually going to learn how to draw a neo-trad rose tattoo.